Now we're going to move to our prospective guest on the programme, and it's a story that follows two people caught in the crosshairs of a small-town revenge kidnapping gone awry. During their novel, their worlds collapse in chaos and violence. Its writer, described by the Financial Times as one of the best story writers in the English language today, the Los Angeles Times calling him a writer of unique genius. Colin Barrett, after a series of short stories, really cementing his reputation. What is his first novel? As you can see, it's called Wild Houses there. It was even longlisted for last year's Booker Prize. Colin Barrett, the Irish-Canadian author, is here in Paris for an event last night, in fact, at the Irish Cultural Centre. His book's coming out in French as well. It's called Fils Prodigue, or Prodigal Sons, if you like, in French. And he joins me here on set. Great to have you with us. Thanks for coming in and talking to us. Explain to us then what the basis of the book is, briefly, if you can. What's it about?
Yeah, I mean, it's well, it's set in the west of Ireland, in County Mayo, which is the region I grew up in, and all my work is set there. So it's a very the location is very important to me, and the story itself concerns a kidnapping, basically. A teenage boy is taken off the streets in a small town, and he's brought to the house of a slightly older but still young man named Dev, who's in his 20s. He's living a very isolated life out in the countryside, so location's very important. He's completely exiled himself from society for reasons that will be revealed through the book. And yeah, he just finds himself in the midst of a kidnapping plot. And then so the story follows the events of this kidnapping as it unravels over the following 3 days.
It sort of follows your trademark, doesn't it, depiction of small-town Irish life very much. And as you say, you grew up from the age of 4 in County Mayo in the west coast of Ireland. Why is that where your writing is based? Why have you based most of your books and your coverage there, if you like?
I think it's one of those things where, as a writer, you don't really choose it. It chooses you, you know. Until I started writing about where I was from, back in my 20s, when I had desperate aspirations to be a writer, but I hadn't really found a subject matter or found something to write about. In retrospect, it was obvious, but I guess I should have. It wasn't until I looked backward, looked towards the town I was from, the region I was from, and started writing about the people there, that my writing just came alive and felt very real to me, and it felt like I might actually be able to do this. So it's always been the great subject of my writing so far. As you said, I've worked across different genres. I wrote 2 short story collections before this novel, so it's my first novel but third book, and I've been writing 15, 20 years, and it's always been, I mean, almost exclusively, whatever the characters, whatever the plot is, the inspiration and the heartbeat of it is Mayo's, the west of Ireland, where I'm from. It's just very important. Yeah.
So how do you forgive me, I don't want to sound rude, how do you make it interesting enough? Because although it's based on ordinary lives, you know, a kidnapping presumably doesn't happen that often in County Mayo. Oh,
no, not too often. That was always my concern when I did start writing about this small town, or versions of this small town I'm from. My obvious worry was, who would want to read this, or will this resonate with people around the world, or anywhere else, any other readership? But I've been delighted to find and surprised. I mean, my book has been translated into a number of languages, and you know, I've been to China, I've been to Poland, I've been to Holland, all over Europe, meeting people. And whether they grew up in a small town or not, a lot of people have said, I recognise the type of people in this and the type of communities you write about. So people aren't that different anywhere, and people break down into groups and identities that are sort of universal. So I've always written about a very particular place and in a very particular way. But I mean, I think it's through doing that the story resonates with other people. If it doesn't have that particularity, if it doesn't have that genuineness to it, I think readers can tell, and they can tell that something isn't authentic. So it resonates with them, even if they're not from a similar place. I think the story
makes so much sense. I understand exactly what you're saying now. As you said, you started off writing a lot of short stories. This time it's a full novel. It's a pretty thick novel as well. How do you make that transition, or why have you made that transition?
I always wanted to write a novel. Yeah, I always did. And I just fell in love with the short story form back when I was able to take writing seriously and was able to do it in a sustained way. So my first 2 books were short story collections. And I was just in love with that form, and I wrote it, but in the back of my head there was always the idea that when I would happen upon a story that felt like it could take the scale of a novel, that I would do it. And it's the opening chapter is Dev, one of the main characters, who's the young man who's living out in the middle of nowhere on his own. He just gets a knock on the door in the middle of the night, and it's these 2 gangsters with this young teenage boy with them. And that was the first scene I wrote years ago of the novel, and it took a long time then to build a story and a world around it, but that image was always there with me, and that was the heart of the novel. And I knew intuitively in some way, this isn't just a short story. There's a full novel here. There's a full world I can explore.
So do you feel as part of that change that your writing has matured, if you like, from going from shorter stories to a larger one?
Yeah, I mean, it's a different form, is the thing, and it's matured just because I've continued to write, and my style has naturally evolved. Even within my short stories, you know, I think I've matured and changed as they've gone along. But certainly with the novel, it's on a different scale, and there's you follow characters a long time. It only takes place over 3 days, which isn't that long a time period, but unlike a short story, which is often just a depiction of a moment really in time, or a moment in someone's life, a novel, you have to follow things through. It's very simple, but that's what makes a good novel, is a writer who sets things up, sets a story up, sets up a premise and follows it through. And that's what separates novels or anything, TV, films that work, the ones that don't. So that was what I really had to learn and hone in this book, yeah.
You say it's very simple. I mean, it can be very difficult, isn't it? I read that you quite often suffer from writer's block, and sometimes you actually abandon things because you say, actually, I can't finish this.
Yeah, I don't suffer from writer's block in the sense that I can't write, but for sure I take a long time with stuff, and you know, this novel took years, and but it was me figuring things out, and it was simultaneously very frustrating because it often felt like you weren't getting anywhere, but very rewarding. And I do love writing is a solitary pursuit. It's not a collaborative art. It's an art where ultimately you have to close the door on the world and just you and your page for vast periods of time. And I do love that ultimately, and I love working out a world and working out my characters. What I trust in is, if I have the characters there, in this case Dev and Nikki, the two main characters, and I just have to trust, even if it's going to take a long time to work out the particulars of the story, and as I said, make sure it's set up properly and followed through in a way that's going to satisfy readers. I just trust in my faith in the characters will get me there eventually. And
how do you form those characters? I mean, are they basically based on individual people, or are they amalgamations of different people that you've met and known?
Yeah, I mean, it's mysterious where they come from. You know, you're pulling, of course, from pieces from people you know.
No one's going to recognise them. So.
There's never any like one-to-one correlation for me. I'm always at best people are composites, and it's a type of person I know. It's a type of person I know. Like Nikki, the other main character, she's a 17-year-old teenage girl, and she's an innocent kid in many ways, but because of what's happened in her life, she's quite shrewd and worldly compared to the other teenagers in the town who live a slightly more sheltered life. So she's just based on a type of person, a type of young woman I've met who's very capable and just maybe has come out of hard circumstances, and that's shaped them in a way. So it's having met a certain type of person, and they feed in, and you find something in them that you think will work for a character, for sure. But it's a mysterious process, because it's never as easy as, I'll just base this character on this eccentric person I know. It's always a mix. It's always and there's lots of yourself in it that you're not even aware of course.
Yeah, I can imagine people reading it and thinking, that's you. Yeah. Finally, I mean, what comes next for you? Are you considering more novels from Northwestern Ireland, or are you thinking of something completely different?
My current project is another novel, yeah. And but as I said, I've worked in the short story form for a long time.
Similar style there, or something completely different?
It's set in it's set in the west of Ireland for sure. Yeah. This isn't a hard rule. If I ever start a story and it's set somewhere else, I will follow that impulse for sure. Mm-hmm. But it's still a very rewarding place to write about, and it's like a tuning fork. It sets the tone for my whole work, and allows me then to work on character. But I'm getting older, and it'll be my second book, so the characters themselves, I can't say too much about it, but it is Wild Houses concerns a lot of young people, and so did my earlier books. So the characters in the current thing I'm working on are a little bit older, and have a little bit of a different perspective on things. So even though it's set geographically in the same kind of world, it has a different tone and a different perspective on it, for sure.
Well, great to hear about the book. Thanks very much for coming in and talking to us about it all today. Colin Barrett, then, the book called Wild Houses, as I said, described in which one was it? The one that I really liked. Yeah, Los Angeles Times, a writer of unique genius.
Oh, sure. We'll take that.
Can't get better than that, can you? Thanks very much for coming in and talking to us.